Okay, now we will talk about Lab 7. We have 2 exercises and 1 problem. So let's go ahead down to exercise 1. It's after a bit of reading, just making sure you're up to speed on arrays. But we're given a piece of code for exercise 1 that reads in an array of the size, which is defined in your code. It creates that array and allows the user to enter that many numbers to fill up the array, and then displays those numbers in reverse. And it does this by counting backwards with this for loop. So it starts with I equals size. So if size is 8, it starts by looking at index number 7, I minus 1. So there are 8 total, so 0 to 7. So it starts with 7, then subtracts 1. So then it would look at 6, then look at 5, look at 4, and so forth. So all this program is going to do is read in values of an array and then write them out in reverse. So let's start with that. All I've done so far is started a project and copied it over. So I'm going to build it and verify what it does. And if I look here, I see that the variable size is equal to 8, so I probably need 8 numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, 4. And then it shows them in reverse. So number 8 is shown first, and then so 4, 3, 2, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. So all this does is displays or outputs those array quantities in reverse. For exercise 1, we want to modify it so it reads in that array and then actually reverses the contents of the array and then displays it again. So this is different than what we are doing here. We are just displaying in reverse here. So this is not correct, displaying in reverse order. Because what it wants us to do is actually reverse the contents of A. And so that's what we are going to do. You may remember from one of our earlier labs, we had to swap the contents of 2 variables. We had 2 variables that we got an input for, and to swap them we needed an intermediate variable to keep us from losing the values. The same concept is going to be required here. Not only will we need, I call this A, the variable is called numList. So we need to reverse the contents of numList. So I'm going to make an intermediate array, and we'll see why that is in just a moment. I'll call it numRev, and it's going to be the same size. So if we think about reversing these contents, that means taking what is in the first element and putting it in the last, the second element, putting it in the next to last, the third element, putting it in the third from last, and so forth. Or the other way around, taking the last element, placing it in the first, take the next to last, placing it in the second. But as we do that, we can only do one of those at a time. So from the first element to the last, and then the last element to the first. Whichever one of those 2 options we do first will work, but then the second one will not because we've already overwritten our value. So that's why we need this intermediate storage, and then we'll move everything back to the original numList. So for reversing the contents, I did already mention what we have to do is take the last indexed value. In this particular case, we already have a for loop that's counting down and starts at size. So let's start with that. I'm going to do I minus 1. So there's the last element of numList being addressed right there. So the question is, where do we want that to go? So we need to take the last element of numList and place it in the first element of numRev. And so the puzzle part of this is how do we index this so that it points at the first index element, the first index. So it needs to be a 0 when I is equal to size. One thing you could do is make a variable for this and just have some in count, start at 0, and then do numRev count, and do count plus plus at the end. That way it would start at 0 and it would count up as this num list is counting down because of the for loop. So the two are counting in opposite directions. That will move all the numbers over. A more efficient way to do that is to just use the relationship based on I that we already have changing. So if we need it to be a 0 first, we can just do size minus I. So it'll be a 0, then when I is 1 less, it will be a 1, and then when I is 2 less, it will be a 2, and so forth. So this will perform your reversing operation. But remember I said there was something else we needed. We need to actually swap the contents of, or sorry, take what we did in numRev, which was our reversed array, and put it back into numList. So I'm going to say put reversed array back into numList, and we'll do that just by saying, using a for loop that is counting up again, starting at 0, numList I equals numRev I. So numRev is the reverse of numList. What we're going to do is just set those numRev back into numList. So we're placing the reversed array back into numList. And finally, we need it to display again. So I'm doing this in 4 different loops. You could condense some of this if you wanted to, and for example, do a cout in this loop. But I'm going to display numList again, just for the sake of completeness. So we're going to cout numList I. So again, a loop counting from 0 up to size minus 1. It's size minus 1 because of this less than. If it was less than or equal to, I would go up to size. But because it's just less than, it's I minus 1. Let's add an end of line just for good measure so we can see what we're doing. And so that should be pretty good. We may want another another end line or 2 here just to clear up our formatting. But what we should see is first of all, we should see no errors when we build and debug. So let's do that. And so size was still 8. So let's enter 8 values. I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And what we have displayed is the reverse, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But we displayed them by counting up. And the goal of this exercise, and what we were wrapping our heads around, was how to actually reverse the contents of the array, not just output it in reverse, but actually reverse the contents. And the purpose was to help give us more of a feeling of how arrays work and about moving through arrays. So looping through arrays is something we will do all the time. But with that, we displayed the reversed contents. And by doing that, we achieved exercise 1. So that's the end of that one.